Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update, first part thereof for the 25th of January 2024. I am in a ranty mood today. I'm not going to rant in this video, but by goodness, I might have a rant in the second video. Just press. Anyway, let's get to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. And my goodness, we have some massive numbers again today posted by the Ukrainians. 950 personnel lost is a huge number of people to have lost in a day. It appears that the Russians must be attacking along the front line in a number of places to be losing this many people and this many pieces of equipment. 30 tanks is a phenomenal loss of tanks. 42 APVs is a phenomenal loss of armoured vehicles. And 59 artillery systems is absolutely incredible. Now, those skeptical amongst you, and it's good to have healthy skepticism, will be asking, where's the evidence of this? Of these figures, can we justify these claims? Can we justify believing these figures ourselves? And I keep showing you, hopefully, evidence to support the conclusion that these are at least somewhat accurate. And if they are inaccurate, they are proportionally inaccurate, which means to say, and we've looked at evidence previously to do with the Avdiivka losses, that when the losses go up in terms of visually confirmed losses, these figures go up, and when they go down, they go down. In other words, they at least track, but it's whether they are one-to-one accurate or overstating it by 60% or whatever, or somewhere in the middle. So the question is, exactly how accurate are they on a daily basis? And the biggest gap, I think, between confirmed losses and claim losses is in the artillery section. I've been talking about how the stats from people like Andrew Perpetua skew towards drone destroyed equipment, and that may mean that we are lacking evidence in, say, for example, losses of artillery systems. Maybe FPV drones are less responsible for taking out those systems. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but we're just going to have a lack of confirming evidence for that. I don't know, it's difficult. There are people who say, well, how are they still heavily bombarding, say, southern Avdiivka with huge amounts of artillery? And to lose 16 a day and to do that fairly consistently is going to be a massive problem for the Russians, but it doesn't mean they suddenly don't have artillery. They still have the ability to replace artillery. These might be damaged bits of kit that can be fixed up, but they have just thousands and thousands of pieces of artillery sitting in fields in Russia. The question is, how easy is it to convert those into pieces on the front line? I don't know, but as I keep saying, at some point it's going to hurt, and I'm sure it is hurting already. The claims that the Russians are really, from themselves, that they're really suffering with counter battery capabilities and so on and so forth. Anyway, 30 tanks, 42 armored personnel vehicles, and 59 artillery systems is just a phenomenal day of losses. And even as I keep saying, even if you take 30%, so take a third off that, 20 tanks, still got 30 APVs and 40 artillery systems. That's still a phenomenal loss, even if it's overstating by a third. One multiple launch rocket system, one anti-aircraft warfare system, 39 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 4 pieces of special equipment. Just, again, consistent days of losses like this. Russians must surely be in trouble. And that's why Andrew Perpetua, when he looks at his loss stats, he accumulates himself, and he has heaps of different spreadsheets behind the scenes accounting for all these different losses. He said the other day that I can't see the Russians being able to do attacks like they're doing in 8 months' time. It might happen even sooner than that, but they're just going to run out of equipment. When we look at the Ukrainian stats here, okay, let's take that one deco off, which he again, like yesterday, there were 2 trees that he had as decoys. He's got one in there. So we'll take that off. And you can see that the Ukrainians are losing at least, well, it's at least a 2-to-1 loss ratio, Russian to Ukrainian losses. We have a couple of comms tower, boat, D30 artillery piece, T64 tank. So that's fairly low value stuff. D30 is an old bit of artillery equipment, as is a T64 in terms of tanks. But 2 Bradleys on there, 1 damaged, 1 destroyed, is going to be a loss for the Ukrainians. They've been effectively used around Avdiivka. Then we go up to the Russian losses, and we have an IL-76 cargo plane. That's obviously a very expensive loss for the Russians, and we're going to talk again about that. In fact, most of the other section today will be on that. Some surveillance and comms equipment, few bits of artillery. Then we've got another T90 to add to the list of T90s, a couple of T72 P3Ms. That's a Mod 2022, which I think is an upgraded but downgraded version, as in they upgraded it but they didn't have the equipment to upgrade it properly, so it's actually less able than other tanks, other similar tanks. So that's how I understand the 2022 upgrade there. BMPs, a number of those being taken out, as Typhoon, MRAP, mine resistant ambush protection vehicle, and then Loafs and other vehicles, assaulted vehicles. So more losses for the Russians, especially if you take into account that aircraft, that's going to be a huge loss in terms of value, although not to the same degree that we've seen in the last couple of days, where the Russians have, according to Andrew Perpetua, lost a phenomenal amount of kit. Comparatively speaking, this is less of a bad ratio compared to the last 2 days. But then looking at general staff figures, the Russian losses are stupendously high along many of these categories, and what explains that difference. Andrew Perpetua also says that Russia is back to bombing Kherson very regularly, by the way, hitting towns and cities all along the river with 250 and 500 kilogram bombs. They've been doing this for, I don't know, at least a week now. Ukraine is shooting down planes. That stopped Russia for a bit, but it's back. I bet if Ukraine shot down more planes now, it would make Russia really second guess flying for a long while. But until Ukraine is willing to risk a Patriot battery again, I imagine these bombings will continue to increase in frequency. They've increased a lot in the past 2 to 3 days. That is very challenging for the Ukrainians along the Dnipro River. Those aviation bombs are a real challenge, and pretty vicious bits of kit, big bombs doing a lot of damage. And fairly indiscriminately along that river. Yes, they do hit targets, but sometimes you're wondering really what the targets are. A lot of civilian stuff being taken out. It's just, Russian forces being targeted near Avdiivka in this video montage here. I can't show it to you, but it'll be linked below. Also, a lot of broken Russian equipment can be seen in the area. Work of the 47th Mechanized Brigade. These are the guys with the Bradleys, if I remember correctly, doing a good job around Avdiivka. It is tough around Avdiivka, but this montage just shows how vicious drones are, and how actually some of the explosives on the drones are pretty sizable. They're starting to get towards being able to do what artillery shells can do, moving towards that, and they are certainly being used as artillery shells in many situations now. Obviously there are challenges, and they won't have the kinetic impact of artillery rounds, but there's a lot of damage being done with drones, and that montage, for example, shows it is not nice for the Russian troops around there, but of course likewise that will be the case for the Ukrainians, particularly around Avdiivka too. Moving on, we have PS11 here saying, quoting from Astra, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked a military training ground in occupied Ilovaisk, so that's just sort of behind Donetsk city. There are dead and wounded. Explosions in Ilovaisk, Donetsk region, on January the 24th at around 3 p.m. were reported by local public and residents. According to Astra sources, as a result of shelling, presumably from a HIMARS rocket launcher, at a military training ground near the village of Pokrovka. There were killed and wounded servicemen. Their number is being established. Neither the Russian nor the Ukrainian side officially reported the shelling. So those are numbers of people that could be added to these personnel losses. If stuff like that happens and say they take out, I don't know, 50 people, 100 people, then obviously that's going to have a big impact on those figures. Right, moving on to Russia on fire here, and I presume that is what's going on here rather than anything else. Russia Telegram channels report that an airboat production workshop is on fire in the Krasnoyarsk region. The area of the fire is over 1,700 square meters. Cost of airboats here reaches 4.4 million rubles, about $50,000. It's a big fire, that one. That is fairly sizable, and the whole workshop has been engulfed. It produces expensive flat-bottomed watercraft with inflatable and solid hulls and aircraft engines being manufactured there. So it could be that has been targeted in some way, or it could just be that's Russia on fire. And then another similar sort of situation here, where in Nizhny Novgorod there's reportedly a fire at a factory that makes gas military trucks and jeeps. See if that gets any worse going forward. That's sort of coming out this morning. Right, moving on to distance strikes and whatnot. Last night there were some Shaheeds launched into Ukraine. 14 of them, 11 of them were shot down. So that's a pretty good interception rate. Obviously what goes up must come down, so they can still produce damage when they fall to the ground. Okay, so where did they hit? Well, Odessa was definitely targeted. We've also got drones hitting Kharkiv and Chuhiv as well, and there's imagery about of things being sort of on fire, things being hit by drones, but no news of any military targets or anything specifically high value being hit. In Odessa, a residential building was hit by a drone. Don't know whether that's as a result of one being taken out by air defenses, or whether that was where it hit intentionally or accidentally. Right, Russian Telegram channels report on a fire on or in the area of an oil depot in Tuapse in Krasnodar region. So some sources report that the oil depot is close to the Rosneft oil refinery. Some Telegram channels claim the fire was caused by a drone attack. Was definitely a drone attack from what I can gather. So it's this energy facility was hit. Now, the explosion and fire were reported near the oil refinery at Tuapse, which is 440 kilometers from the front, and that is there on the Black Sea. That would require a fairly lengthy drone route. However, we've seen plenty of those, when drones have attacked St. Petersburg and Moscow and whatnot. So fairly sizable fire going on there. Alarming, says PS101, fourth oil and gas facility that's been hit in 6 days. That is obviously part of the Ukrainian strategy at the moment. Now, we know it's hit by drones because as it's on fire with...
Летит гандон, ёбаный, мразь. Сейчас убьют.
As it's on fire with, an explosion having taken place at that facility, the fire's in the background, you can hear another drone going in. I think the claim is it's one of these Boba drones, the Beaver drones, that the Ukrainians are producing in fairly decent numbers at the moment. It's all geolocated. The footage is fairly... shows a fairly significant fire going on at that facility. I don't know if that's before a subsequent drone hit or whether that's after all the drones hit. But anyway, pretty sizable fire there. Now, Tendar says, as way of analysis, a strike against Russian oil facilities in Tuapse in Russia, only days after the successful strike against Ust-Luga terminal, removes all doubt that we are dealing with a targeted effort to eliminate all Russian oil and gas ports, so that they are rendered useless for any operations, any major ones, sorry. When looking at the Russian oil and gas pipeline map, then you will notice that almost all of them head west. There is a small pipeline going east, but it's not connected to the main oil fields in western Siberia and only small in size. Russia's economic lifeline goes all the way west. In the past, this was a matter of problems for the West since Russia used this power to blackmail Europe. Now, its close proximity has become the source of weakness. Among all those pipelines, only 5 end in Russian seaports. Every other pipeline, especially the Druzhba pipeline, enters Western NATO territory and are therefore subject of sanctions or worse. The Druzhba pipeline goes anyway partly through Ukrainian territory, and the rest, such as the pumping stations, are in firing range. 3 of the pipelines end near St. Petersburg in the Baltic Sea. 2 of them go to the Black Sea. Among them, Ukraine successfully has struck 2 already. Ust-Luga is inoperable for the next weeks or even months. Shipping companies will increasingly reconsider sending their vessels to those ports that are military targets. This will be a big headache for the Russian war effort. The current attacks are still small in size, using a handful of drones, but already caused considerable damage. When Ukraine starts mass hitting those ports, when the Russian air defense will not be able to stop the outcome, even when destroying 99% of all drones, things get worse for the Russians. National Geographic map is from 2006, yet not much has changed since then. The major difference I see is the extension of the natural gas pipeline grid, of which some have been turned into seawater pipelines. The irony behind that speaks for itself. Putin and his oligarchs had never ever anticipated this situation, like everything since February 2022. Everything that Moscow does makes a bad situation worse, and I'm sure that sooner or later somebody in Putin's circle, of which nobody is a saint, but simply tired of this vicious cycle, will do the math. That is easier to remove Putin than remove Ukraine, the Ukrainian will for freedom and independence. Interesting kind of calculus there. So yeah, the Ukrainians are really hitting some of these facilities hard, and that will be having a real impact on Russian income. Look, if Ust-Luga closes for weeks or months, then that's millions and millions of barrels not being sold, and that will affect the coffers for sure. On top of that, reports coming in of an explosion in the center of occupied Berdyansk. It seems to have been at or very near the railway station. That's quite a substantial explosion in the middle. And then we're going to go on to talk about that cargo plane mainly now. Now, there's this weird situation going on. Let me explain. So yesterday I did a debunking video of what took place and the Russian claims, debunking the Russian claims that POWs are on board. All that evidence still holds, and in fact, there's even more evidence to add to that. Which is to say, all of the kind of tangible evidence and the open source intelligence evidence points towards the fact that, or points towards the conclusion that the Russians are lying and POWs weren't on board. But something weird is going on. So my probability analysis is shifting in favor of there being POWs on board, but more in favor. I still don't think there were POWs on board. None of the evidence supports that, apart from this. But this is kind of weirdly important, or it's very important, and it's weird and cryptic. And it's that Ukrainian official statements are odd and seem to suggest that perhaps there were POWs on board. So open source intelligence analysis leads one to conclude that the Russians are lying, that no POWs on board. And you would think that the Ukrainians would have access to all of that, and in fact, even more information. And yet the Ukrainian official lines are weirdly ambiguous. Okay, so the BBC article here says, just talks through how it happened and what happened in the information spaces. And says, as such talk grew louder and spread around the world, Ukraine, so that there were POWs on board, Ukraine still made no comment. Russia's noise inevitably filled the silence. In Kiev, we started to hear rumors that a prisoner swap had been planned for today. So that's that circumstantial connection, circumstantial evidence maybe to support the Russian narrative that there was due to be a prisoner swap. Then confirmation of that from a source, but no one in Kiev would say so officially. Everyone we called for information just told us not yet, or we're checking information, or just wait. For 8 hours, there was nothing. That didn't stop the speculation from Russia, including wild claims that Ukraine had killed its own soldiers on purpose. The supposed rationale for that is so twisted it's not worth repeating, but dismissing such talk doesn't mean dismissing the chance that Ukraine has made a terrible mistake. After all, we do know that the plane came down and Ukraine has the capacity for that. Right, so, yeah. And then Zelensky came out and said some things last night that were kind of weird. Well, not weird, but made you think that maybe there could be something in what the Russians are saying. It is clear that the Russians are playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners of war, the feelings of their relatives, and the emotions of our society. The facts must be established as much as possible, given that the aircraft crashed in Russian territory that is beyond our control. Right now, the key word is facts. I received reports from the Commander-in-Chief, General Staff, and the use of our Air Force. Military intelligence is clarifying the fate of all prisoners of war. Security Service investigates all circumstances. I also instructed Ukraine's foreign minister to inform partners based on any information available to Ukraine. Our state will insist on an international investigation. I think he's gone into an important meeting this morning, Zelensky. So you're thinking, that's not very clearly saying, no, we didn't do it, and here's all the evidence that we have to suggest that, sorry, not that we didn't do it, that POWs were not on board, okay? This is the Moscow Times, so exiled Russian media that is basically anti-Putin. What do we know about the Il-76 crash? But I just want to read you the section of Kyiv's reaction, because like this is the only evidence that POWs are on board as far as I can work out, apart from like just the assertion from the Russians. Ukraine's military has not taken responsibility for the disaster, but neither has it denied claims. In a press release published several hours after the crash, Ukraine's General Staff said it would take all measures to protect Ukraine and Ukrainians, including targeting Russian military planes that it believes are used to transport missiles. Ukrainian military intelligence spokesperson Yusuf told Radio Free Europe, a news outlet, that a prisoner swap was planned for Wednesday, but he could not confirm whether any Ukrainian prisoners were on board at the time of the crash. I can state the exchange plan for today is currently not taking place, he said. Ukraine also said it had no reliable information about who was on board the plane. Currently, quote, we currently do not have reliable or comprehensive information on who was on board the plane or in what number, Ukraine's main intelligence directorate said in a statement. So again, like just being really conservative, not really going either way. Without commenting on whether Ukrainian prisoners of war were on board, the intelligence agency accused Moscow of endangering the lives of captured soldiers. So then, you know, you would only say they're endangering their lives if they were on board, or there's a possibility they're on board. So this, to me, talks to the theory that the intelligence don't really know. Like the Ukrainian intelligence aren't sure, but maybe the Russians have said this, and the Ukrainians like, oh, hang on. Rather than we've got all the evidence to suggest you didn't do that, actually we just don't know. Quote, Ukraine was not informed about the number of vehicles, routes, and forms of delivery of prisoners, it said. It is known that prisoners are delivered by air, rail, and road. This may indicate deliberate actions by Russia aimed at endangering the lives and safety of prisoners. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia was playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners. It's obvious that the Russians are playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners with the feelings of their relatives and the emotions of our society, Zelensky said in the evening address, which did not confirm or deny Russia's claims, but called for an international investigation into what brought down the plane. Do you get what I'm saying? So, like, it's a little bit weird that the Ukrainians aren't outright denying it in light of the kind of evidence that's out there. So that then leads me to think that maybe they do have evidence that could support the Russian narrative. I'm just not sure. But let me just remind you of what the evidence is against the Russian narrative. Okay, I'll try and do this as quick as possible. But just remember that the SSU has opened a case due to the crash of the Il-76 in Belgorod region, according to the press service of the SSU. So, you know, there is a formal investigation going on. Okay, so we have also, to add to that, Oleshchuk, Commander Mykola Oleshchuk, the Air Force commander, accusing Russia today of attempting to discredit Ukraine using the case of the crash of the Russian Il-76 transport plane. Quote, during the January 24th massive Russian propaganda targets external audiences with a flow of fake news in an attempt to discredit Ukraine in front of the international community. So that's actually the strongest rebuke of the Russians I've heard from official Ukrainian sources. So if you remember, the first weird thing that came out yesterday from the Ukrainians was a general staff statement that said this: in order to reduce the missile threat in the Kharkiv direction, the armed forces not only control the airspace but also monitor in detail the launch points of missiles and the logistics of their delivery, especially with the use of military transport aviation. The armed forces take all measures to protect Ukraine and Ukrainians. The enemy's inability to achieve any results on the battlefield continues his strategy of terror, in particular in the Kharkiv direction. We see the use of missile strikes with the aim of destroying Kharkiv and killing civilians in other cities of Ukraine. In the last week alone, the enemy launched, etc., 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 and then goes on to say, taking this into account, the armed forces. Sorry, in order to reduce the missile threat, the armed forces of Ukraine not only control the airspace but also monitor in detail the launch points of missiles and the logistics of their delivery, especially with the use of military transport aviation. The recorded intensity of shelling is directly related to the increase in the number of military transport planes that have recently been heading to the Belgorod airfield. Taking this into account, the armed forces of Ukraine will continue to take measures to destroy means of delivery, control the airspace, to destroy the terrorist threat, including the Belgorod-Kharkiv direction. So that is insinuating, in my opinion, or I've just got rid of that, that they were monitoring the airspace, and that there were possibly, munitions on board. There's no kind of talk there about POWs. The Russians then released a list of POWs that were supposedly on the flight. So here's something else dodgy about the list published by Simonyan. So that's Margarita Simonyan, the propagandist. Of those on board, supposedly on board, 17 were already free and in Ukraine, exchanged on the 3rd of January, according to one source. Here's a post on Telegram and a translation. There have been these crossings out that you can see there, the red lines of people that had already been released. And so therefore the idea that Russia the idea that there were definitely POWs on board, and here's a list of the POWs that were on board, the idea that that's true is very, very it's slim that that's true, given that 17 of them supposedly are already in Ukraine. Russian propagandist lists POWs, says the Kyiv Independent, allegedly killed in a plane crash. Ukraine hasn't confirmed it. Russian propagandist Simonyan published a list of Ukrainian prisoners of war allegedly killed. And the Ukrainian media outlet Suspilna analysed the list that Simonyan shared and confirmed that most of the names were previously mentioned as being POWs or missing persons. Some had appeared in captivity in Russian propaganda videos. Suspilna could not confirm that those on the list were actually on the plane when it crashed, nor that they were potentially part of the prisoner exchange. And then subsequently, people have noted that 17 of them are already in Ukraine. So that's an issue for the Russian claims. Since the media is just parroting the Russians without any investigative journalism has died these days, says Sofia Ukraini. Here is a nice long thread with some facts about the Il-76 being shot down over Russia. Firstly, Il-76 was leaving Belgorod and heading away from Ukraine, which is exactly what I said yesterday. Second, it came from Iran. I also talked about that yesterday. It came from Iran on that day, from that morning. So the idea that it would have Ukrainian POWs on board is highly dubious. Third, the list of POWs that Russia said was on board. A large part of these people have already been exchanged, marked in red there, and you can check that out. It's on open source now. Fourth, where are the 74 bodies? So the idea that there was differing numbers of people, of crew, and people looking after it. But anyway, here is imagery of the crash site. There are absolutely no bodies there at all that you can see. So fifth, according to Russia, there were 74 people on board, 6 crew, 65 POWs, and that would mean there were only 3 guards. Max was on another, so Max Kolesnikov was on another POW exchange, and he said he had 20 guards for 50 POWs. So the fact that the idea that you would have 3 guards for 65 POWs is highly unlikely. Sixth, here is the president of Somalia giving Putin his condolences. Quote, I heard about the crash of the plane. I would like to express my sincere condolences on behalf of myself and the people for the death of the Russian soldiers. Right? So, okay. But also there are some claims that actually that plane was on the way, we'll come back to this, was on the way to where? Africa, with basically what is now the replacement for Wagner PMC on board. And the idea there is it's Russian soldiers, not Ukrainian POWs. Of course, you still got the issue that there are no soldiers or there are no bodies being found there. However, there's also the idea that the Russian MOD stopped the Russian emergency services doing the work and closed off the site and cleaned it up rather quickly. So make of that what you will. What happened to the other Ukrainian what happened is either, Ukraine shot it down or Russia's famed air defense did. There were no POWs on board. This is just a lie so as not to embarrass themselves. Now, if only the people getting paid for breaking news stories actually did their job, that would be fantastic. Seventh, here is more footage from the crash sites, still no bodies. I've unfortunately seen footage of when Russia shot down the Dutch MH17 and there were bodies everywhere. I mean, this is a really good point. Like, if you've got that many bodies, and these are in strapped into chairs and stuff. I would imagine in the same way an Air Force, a civil aviation airliner would have it. So I don't know what effect that would have on bodies being all over the place. There was a large explosion. Some people did get back to me because I said that large explosion more likely intimates explosives on board and munitions. This was a huge explosion. Someone's saying if that was full of fuel, then it could have an explosion like that. So I'll take that on board. And actually, if it was flying from Belgorod, it is more likely to be full of fuel, which is then going against the Russian claim that it's flying to Belgorod with prisoners. Okay, just a little bit more. In an odd twist, the Russian Il-76, originally reported as the one shot down over Belgrade, was in fact en route to Syria and possibly the aircraft carrying Russian fighters for Africa Corps to Burkina Faso. He says there are some caveats here, so goes through like the arguments against this, then goes through the arguments for this, talking about tail numbers and the livery consistent with the Africa Initiative. The aircraft would have landed in Syria, most likely, and so on and so forth. Anyway, to summarize, this is possibly, but by no means certainly, a plane that played a role in transferring of Africa Corps, more formally MOD Wagner successor, personnel into Africa. There are other interesting Russian government Il-76 flights in Africa today, but their timelines and livery don't match. So he's basically saying that there's some good reasons, not like, open and closed case, but there's some good reason to think that was a Russian plane delivering something to Africa on behalf of the Russian MOD. Then you've got Anton Gerashchenko doing a really long debunking here. So let's just quickly go through this. The airplane carrying prisoners of war who were to be delivered for exchange is the official version of the Russian government. Version is illogical, he says, and here's why. A, the aircraft crashed and was shot down on takeoff from the airfield in Belgorod. Where exactly could the prisoners, who were already 40 kilometers away from the Ukrainian borders, have been delivered to? The Kototlivka Pokrovka border point is the only functioning corridor for exchanges. It's 95 kilometers away from Belgorod, and it's impossible to deliver anyone there by plane. It's just, that to me is like, that's an open and closed case. I mean, if it does have, POWs in, then they're taking POWs away from the exchange. B, that very aircraft has never been used for transporting POWs before. Moreover, it flew to the Middle East, and its current flight was a return from there. The Il-76 shot down today near Belgorod was returning to Tchaikovsky military air base after its routine patrol of the Middle East. Such a route the aircraft has been doing regularly for several years now, sources reported. Of course, that goes slightly against the idea that it was due to go to Africa. C, the Russian side claims to have warned the Ukrainian side about the route of the prisoners' delivery. However, a strike on our own soldiers is absolutely not favorable to Ukraine and would create massive problems for us, both at home and in the international arena. Whereas for the Russian Federation, everything is exactly the opposite, as a first reaction of officials confirms. For example, the Speaker of the State Duma, Vladimir Volodin, changed the discussion towards the necessity of finding out what weapon was used to shoot down the aircraft, with an obvious promotion of demands to the West to stop providing high-tech military aid to Ukraine. D, the aircraft was flying north in the opposite direction from the border with Ukraine. No official Ukrainian spokesman gave any information about the shooting down of the aircraft. No confirmation or claim of responsibility. Uh, Next one. So we got A, B, C, D. This is actually E. Um, the attack on the aircraft could happen only in case of a Russian provocation and special operation of Russian special services that misinformed the Ukrainian side about the particular flight. There was no evidence that there were 63 Ukrainian prisoners of war on board. The lists that are thrown into the media space about the Russian side are not any kind of evidence, and it's impossible to verify them. In fact, about 17 names on the list coincide with the names of prisoners of war already exchanged earlier. F. Observers pointed out that for such a large number of prisoners, the number of declared accompanying officers, 3, is too small, which is a violation of all statutes and protocols. G, such a large number of victims is not confirmed by the first photos and videos from the crash site. Neither bodies nor the fragments were seen in the frame. Only later it was stated that the bodies were found 1.5 to 2 kilometers away from the crash site, which is also strange given the circumstances of the fall as captured on the video. And G, I think, or Will H, whatever, he's got his letters all muddled up. There are obvious traces of detonation of some cargo on board. There was data from Il-76 carrying missiles for the S-300 complex, i.e. it is extremely strange that there could be both prisoners of war and a cargo of missiles on the same board. I talked about it yesterday. And his conclusions are: 1, the circumstances of the crash have not been established fully. The fact of Ukrainian prisoners of war being on board has not been established either. If the latter is confirmed, then they could have been on board this particular aircraft only as a result of a provocative special operation by Russian special services, which might then go into what Zelensky was saying in playing with the lives of these people, playing with Ukrainian lives here. So it could be that they were, baiting the Ukrainians to shoot at this plane with POWs on board, going somewhere other than to exchange them. I don't know. I don't if that's what Gerashchenko is getting at. 2, the situation is favourable to Russia and 100% disadvantageous to Ukraine. The allegations about the purposeful killing of its own military captives is a deliberate lie that fits only within the framework of Russian propaganda cliches. Now we know, I think this propaganda is going viral across Ukraine. The Ukrainians are worried about this. This is really acting against Ukraine. 3, in the operational information boost, Russian agents in the West and Russian bot farms have been noticed and become very active from the very first minutes. 4, the circumstances of the story with the Il-76 are similar to the story of the killing of Ukrainian POWs at the Russian Olenivka prison camp. No evidence that the strike on the camp was conducted by the Ukrainian side has ever appeared, and international experts were not allowed to visit the scene. 5, if the Russian Federation is confident of its version of events, it should initiate the creation of an international commission to investigate the case and open access to all materials related to it. That's a really good point, by the way. But if the Russians are sure that the Ukrainians have shot down a plane with POWs, you would have the Russians presenting you with all the evidence possible for that, and then saying, and now we're going to open an investigation because this is absolutely terrible. Or at least that's how they would claim that to be. But no, instead they've closed down the site. There's very little footage coming out. It all seems to be fairly much showing no POWs on board, and the evidence just isn't there. They aren't presenting a case to the world that you would imagine they would do if they had that case, right? Yeah, as I keep saying, if you would, you could. You can't. You answer. You can't. And then there's a translation coming out, and I'm trying to get my head around this translation. It's not a perfect translation, but this is supposedly an intercept from the aircraft and air traffic control. Hello, is this GT 5425? Yes. We are at the Belgorod Flight Control Center. Urgently send 3 scouts to Yablon. I don't know what that means. What is burning there? A military board has fallen. What fell on board? A cargo rocket board. Which ones are known? Prepare a mixture of hydrazine and kerosene. We are on the line. In other words, that looks very much like they are admitting that was carrying a cargo of rockets, which is what the Ukrainians originally said. I don't know. I'm because It's just confusing. All the evidence suggests that the POWs weren't on board, but the Ukrainians are saying very guarded things that are a little bit cryptic that might suggest that POWs could have been on board, but that possibly the Russians were playing with Ukrainian lives in so doing. Make of it what you will. My percentage needle has shifted marginally back towards the Russian accounts, but only on account of what the Ukrainian officials are saying. All of the evidence still suggests it is not what the Russians are saying, and that's what I still think is the case, even though my needle may have shifted a little bit. Finally, I love this. Missing person, like a missing cat sign on a telegraph pole somewhere. Valery Gerasimov, not been seen since the 29th of December 2023 in Crimea. And that's where those missiles hit. Who knows? Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.